In a time beyond the age of fire, beyond the age of lords, when the stars themselves grew weary of bearing witness to cycles of rise and fall, something stirred in the space between worlds. The lands between, a realm shaped by the will of the greater will, had known its share of gods and monsters, of Empyreans and Tarnished. But none could have foreseen what darkness would slip through the cracks of reality when the Erdtree's light momentarily dimmed. It began with a whisper, a sound that no ear could truly hear, yet all souls felt. The Tarnished who wandered the broken lands paused in their eternal struggles, golden eyes cast skyward as something like a cold wind passed through their very being. In the round table hold, the two fingers trembled, and for the first time since the shattering, they bent, not in guidance, but in what could only be described as fear. The first physical sign came not with thunder or earthquake, but with a simple ring, small, unadorned, golden. It appeared in the Limgrave fields as if it had always been there, half buried in the soil near where the first step met the wider world. A wandering merchant found it, held it to the light, and for a moment thought he glimpsed words of fire etched upon its band. By nightfall, the merchant was gone, his donkey found wandering aimlessly, bell still chiming a mournful note. In Lendel, the royal capital, those few who remained amidst its crumbling splendor reported dreams of a lidless eye, wreathed in flame. Soldiers who had stood vigilant against madness for centuries found themselves whispering new words, a black speech that scorched their tongues, yet compelled them to continue. The finger-readers fell silent, their prophecies choked off as if some greater power had seized control of the strands of fate they once so clearly perceived. Far to the north, in the mountain tops of the giants, where even the most determined Tarnished rarely ventured, a new forge kindled itself in the ruins of the ancient giant's cauldron. Its flame was not the familiar orange-red of the forge of the giants, but instead burned with a pale, malevolent light. The remaining fire monks who tended what remained of their faith found themselves drawn to this new flame, their devotions twisted toward a power they did not understand but could not resist. Beneath Lane-Dell, in the depths of the subterranean shunning grounds, the three fingers sensed a kindred chaos, yet one fundamentally different from their own. Where they offered a frenzied freedom from order, this new presence promised dominion, control, a different path to breaking the golden order, one not of madness, but of terrible, perfect clarity. And it was there, in those befouled depths, that the first servant took form, not born, not created, but transformed, a lowly wretch, forgotten by grace, touched by something beyond the greater will's design, twisted and reshaped into something no longer human. Its flesh grew pale, its form hunched, its eyes gleaming with malicious intellect, where once only hollow despair had dwelled. In its gnarled hands it clutched a scrap of metal that it had hammered into crude resemblance of the golden ring. And as it worked it muttered a name, over and over, though no one was there to hear. Sauron, Sauron, Sauron. In the Erdtree, last refuge of Miquella's dream, Malenia stirred in her slumber, the scarlet rot within her responding to a call she could not name. Her brother's empty cocoon trembled, as if whatever remained of his essence sensed a power that might promise fulfillment of his interrupted ascension. The soldiers who guarded the sacred site reported seeing shadows that moved against the direction of the light, and hearing voices that offered power beyond the rot, beyond the unalloyed gold, if only they would submit to a new master. Across the lands between, those creatures born of the crucible, the primordial form of the Erdtree, felt their ancient aspects shift and change. Misbegotten warriors found their bestial rage focused, sharpened. Omens felt the curse in their blood answer to a will not their own. Even the dragons, descendants of the ancient lords of the sky, sensed a presence that recalled memories of subjugation from before the age of the Erdtree. The Tarnished, who had fought their way across the shattered realm, seeking to become Elden Lord, found their journey newly complicated. Some reported encounters with strange warriors clad in black armor that no smith in the lands between could have forged. Others spoke of ancient barrows unsealed, from which emerged warriors neither living nor dead, their eyes burning with pale fire, their weapons striking with unnatural precision and purpose. But it was Rani the witch who first understood the true nature of what had come. In her tower in the Three Sisters, surrounded by the frost of Caria, she felt the presence of a power that had never been part of the greater will's design, nor of the plans of the outer gods who sought influence over the lands between. This was something else entirely, a being from another world, another cosmos, drawn perhaps by the shattering, by the weakening of the natural laws that governed reality. "A dark lord comes," she told her wolf knight Blood, whose own bestial nature had begun to twist in new and concerning ways since the Golden Ring had appeared. "Not a god as we know them, but something that once aspired to godhood and came terribly close to achieving it. He seeks not the Elden Ring, but to create his own dominion here, a new realm shaped to his will alone." In the Siofra River, the ancestral followers ceased their worship of the stars. Their eternal dances stopped, their horns fell silent. Instead, they turned their gaze downward, as if hearing a call from deeper underground. Their ancestral spirit, when next it manifested, bore a crown of iron upon its skull, and its cosmic light had dimmed, replaced by a smoldering inner flame. The servants of the many outer gods who had long sought influence in the lands between found their connections severed or corrupted. The formless mother's blood flame guttered and changed, burning now with a white heat that consumed rather than empowered. The god of rot's influence warped, its decay becoming directed, purposeful, no longer a natural force but a weapon to be wielded. The frenzied flame itself seemed to withdraw, as if recognizing a rival chaos it could not overcome. In Mogwin Palace, Lord of Blood, Mog sensed the changing winds of power. His dynasty, which he had sought to establish with Miquella as its god, seemed suddenly a pale imitation of what this new presence promised. The very blood he had commanded began to respond less to his will and more to this unseen influence. His Albinorics, once loyal through fear and blood pact, began to chant in their private moments, pledging themselves to a master they had never seen but whose will reached them nonetheless. It was Sir Gideon Ofnir, the all-knowing, who first gathered concrete knowledge of what threatened the lands between. In his relentless pursuit of information, he had collected texts and artifacts from the furthest reaches of the realm. Among them, previously overlooked, was a fragment of stone bearing writing in no language known to the lands between. As the Golden Ring's influence spread, the markings began to glow, and Gideon found he could suddenly read what was written there. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. With this revelation came understanding and terror. Whatever had come to the lands between sought not merely to rule or change it, but to bind it utterly to its will. The shattering had weakened the Golden Order, creating a fracture in reality through which this entity, this Sauron, had extended his influence. And now he sought to establish his dominion, to create not a new order but a singular, unbreakable rule. The golden ring that had appeared was but a fragment, a seed of his power, but already it was taking root. Those who encountered it found themselves altered, their desires twisted toward service to an unseen master. The creatures of the lands between, already warped by the shattering and the various influences of outer gods, proved fertile ground for this corruption. In the consecrated snowfield, a tower of black stone began to rise, though no one witnessed its construction. By day, it seemed to remain the same height, but each morning it had grown taller, stretching toward the sky like a spear pointed at the heart of whatever remained of the greater will's influence. Those tarnished brave or foolish enough to approach reported hearing the rhythmic pounding of hammers, the roar of unearthly forges, though no workers could be seen. From this tower spread a network of influence, like veins carrying poison through the body of the lands between. The servants, transformed by the golden ring, now calling themselves Uruks in their guttural new language, began to gather there, bringing with them others they had captured and corrupted. Trolls were bound in cruel iron, their simple minds overwhelmed and enslaved. Giants were chained and driven mad, transformed into walking engines of destruction. Even the descendants of the ancient dragons were not immune, some now bearing riders clad in armor of strange design, their scales darkened as if scorched by a fire hotter than any in the lands between. In response to this growing threat, unlikely alliances formed. Star-scourge Radan, his mind long lost to the scarlet rot, nonetheless rallied his forces when the new darkness touched the borders of Caelid. Something in the gravity magic that was his birthright recognized an opposing force, not chaos or order, but domination, and resisted. His Red Lion warriors found themselves fighting alongside the very rotted creatures they had so long opposed, unified against war parties of Uruks that swept out of the consecrated snowfield. In Liurnia, Raya Lucaria Academy closed its gates, the glintstone sorcerers withdrawing to study this new phenomenon, but their isolation offered no protection. Within weeks, a faction emerged from within, led by the once respected sorcerer Jeren, now calling himself the Mouth of Sauron. His followers abandoned the pursuit of glintstone magic in favor of darker arts, sorceries that controlled and dominated the will rather than manipulating the physical world. Volcano Manor, long home to those who hunted and devoured the very gods, found itself divided. Some, led by Tanith, saw in Sauron a god worthy at last of their appetite, a challenge, a final hunt. Others, recognizing a power that would consume rather than be consumed, fled, scattering across the lands between to warn of what was coming. It was in this time of growing darkness that the Tarnished, who would be Elden Lord, faced their greatest challenge. The path to restoring the Elden Ring, already perilous beyond measure, now bore this new complication. The golden guidance of grace still led toward the Erdtree, but Intersecting it was a shadow path, a pull toward the Black Tower and the power it contained. For Sauron, newly manifesting in this broken world, recognized in the Tarnished a potential servant unlike any other. Here was a being of extraordinary will who had overcome gods and monsters in their journey. Such a champion, if turned to his purpose, could accelerate his conquest immeasurably. And so he extended his influence, offering visions of power beyond anything the greater will could provide, not godhood, perhaps, but dominion as his most favored lieutenant. Some Tarnished, weary of the seemingly endless struggle toward an Erdtree that remained closed to them, found this offer tempting. Others recognized the threat it posed, not just to the lands between, but to all existence. For if Sauron established his rule here, in this realm where reality itself had been shattered, who could say what other worlds might fall within his reach? The first direct confrontation came at Stormvale Castle. Godric the Grafted, weakest of the demigods, but still possessed of the power of an ancient lineage, found his domain besieged not by Tarnished seeking great runes, but by an army of Uruks, led by a figure known only as the Witch King. The battle was brief and terrible. Godric's grafted limbs, torn from countless warriors to augment his own strength, proved no match for the dark sorceries wielded by this lieutenant of Sauron. In the aftermath, Stormvale was transformed. The grafted horrors that had once filled its halls were replaced by manufacturing works, forges that belched black smoke into the sky as they produced weapons and armor for the growing armies of the Dark Lord. The soldiers who had served Godric now wore iron masks that covered their faces entirely, their humanity hidden, their individuality erased in service to their new master. From Stormvale, the armies of Sauron spread outward. Limgrave fell quickly, its scattered defenders overwhelmed. The Church of Ella became a dark shrine, the merchant who had once offered refuge to Tarnished now hanging from its eaves, a warning to those who would resist. The forests were cut down to feed the forges, the wildlife hunted to extinction or corrupted into mounts and war beasts for the Uruk commanders. To the south, Morn Castle held out longer. The ancient faith of those who guarded the Sword of Morn provided some protection against the corruption, but eventually they too fell. Castle Morn became a breeding ground where captives from across the Weeping Peninsula were transformed through cruel rituals into new Uruks, their humanity systematically stripped away until only service to Sauron remained. In the face of this spreading darkness, the remaining demigods found themselves faced with an impossible choice: resist and likely fall, or submit and retain some measure of their power as vassals to this new Dark Lord. Some, like Morgoth the Omen King, chose resistance, rallying what remained of the forces loyal to the Golden Order. Others, seeing opportunity in chaos, sought to turn the situation to their advantage. Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, attempted to devour an Uruk commander who had been sent to negotiate his submission, but the flesh of these servants of Sauron carried within it a portion of their master's essence, and the god-devouring serpent found itself choked on power it could not digest. Volcano Manor fell silent after that, and when activity resumed, the magma that flowed from its peak burned with a pale, unnatural light. For the Tarnished, guided by grace, the path forward became increasingly unclear. The sights of grace still burned, but their light seemed dimmer, their guidance less certain. Some winked out entirely while new lights appeared, burning not with gold but with a pale, cold flame that drew the eye and mind with hypnotic intensity. The Round Table Hold, once sanctuary for Tarnished on their journey, became contested ground. The two fingers retreated into deeper communion with the greater will, seeking guidance that did not come. In their absence, the inhabitants of the hold turned on each other, some embracing the opportunity presented by Sauron's rise, others clinging desperately to their original purpose. It was Melina, the kindling maiden, who first suggested a desperate solution. "The path to the Erdtree remains closed," she told the Tarnished who would listen, "and now this new power threatens to consume all. But there are older flames than those of the Forge of the Giants, older powers that might burn away this corruption if we dare to seek them." The Tarnished felt the air change. A heaviness settled over the lands that had not been there before, even in the days following the shattering. This was a different kind of corruption, more insidious, more patient, more deliberate. In the ruins of Stormvale Castle, the Dark Lord had established his domain, bending what remained of Godric's servants to his will. The once proud soldiers now bore crude markings upon their armor, a single eye wreathed in flame, and their minds had been subsumed by a collective consciousness that served only one master. From this fortress, Sauron had begun to gather intelligence about this strange new realm. He learned of the demigods who clung to their great runes, fragments of the shattered Elden Ring. He studied the geography of the lands, from the rotting swamps of Caelid to the frozen plateaus of the mountaintops of giants. Most importantly, he discerned the true nature of the Erdtree, a cosmic conduit of order, a manifestation of the greater will's design for this world, and he coveted it. For Sauron understood something that even the Two Fingers did not fully comprehend, that the Elden Ring was not merely a tool of governance or a symbol of order, it was a means of rewriting reality itself, a power akin to the One Ring he had forged in Mordor, but vastly more potent. "I need not destroy this world to rule it," he whispered to himself as he gazed upon the golden tree from Stormvale's highest tower. "I need only to remake it." Melina felt the disturbance as she drifted between sights of grace. A new presence had entered the weave of destiny, altering patterns that had been set since the shattering. This was no demigod or Tarnished. This was something from beyond the stars, beyond the reach of the greater will. She sought out her Tarnished companion with greater urgency now. The path to the Erdtree had grown more perilous, and time was no longer a luxury they possessed. "I bring warning," she said, materializing beside a site of grace where the Tarnished rested. "A shadow has fallen over Limgrave. Stormvale has been claimed by a power unlike any that has walked these lands before. The servants of Godric now bear a new mark and move with singular purpose." The Tarnished listened in silence, the weight of yet another obstacle settling heavily upon weary shoulders. This new threat, it seeks not just a great rune, but all of them. It understands the Elden Ring in ways even the demigods do not. Melina's single visible eye reflected the golden light of the grace. "We must reach the Erdtree before it does." In the dungeons beneath Stormvale, Sauron had discovered something of great value, a forge unlike any he had ever seen. The smithing stones that powered it contained energies reminiscent of the primal fires of Arda, yet distinctly different. Here, weapons and armor were not merely crafted, but imbued with aspects of the world's underlying order. "Bring me the smith," he commanded his thralls. They returned with Hugh, the blacksmith who had been bound to serve in the Round Table hold, but had been captured during a raid. The old troll struggled against his chains, his pride unbroken despite his circumstances. "I serve no master but by the will of Queen Marika," Hugh growled, refusing to meet Sauron's gaze. "Marika is gone," Sauron replied, his voice soft yet penetrating to the core, "and I do not require your willing service, only your knowledge." With that, Sauron placed a hand upon Hugh's brow. The blacksmith's eyes widened as ancient memories not his own flooded his mind, techniques of forging that predated the lands between, methods of binding will and intent into metal that had been used to create the rings of power in another world. When Sauron removed his hand, Hugh slumped forward, his expression vacant. When he spoke again, his voice was hollow. "What would you have me forge, Lord Sauron?" "A ring," Sauron replied. "But first, we require its components." Word of Stormvale's fall reached the Round Table hold, that sanctuary of Tarnished hidden between realms. Gideon Ofnir, the All-Knowing, called a council of the remaining Tarnished of note. "A new player enters the game," Gideon announced, his ornate helmet concealing whatever concern might have shown on his face. "Stormvale Castle has been seized not by a Tarnished seeking glory, but by something else, something that commands not through strength alone, but through domination of will." D, Hunter of the Dead, leaned forward. "Is it of those who live in death?" "No," Gideon replied. "This is neither undead nor demigod. Reports speak of a figure in armor blacker than night, crowned with spikes, wielding powers of fire and shadow. Its servants bear the mark of a flaming eye." "Just another would-be lord," scoffed Diallos. "The lands between have seen many come and go." "This one is different," interrupted Sir Gideon. "It doesn't seek to become Elden Lord through the established path. It doesn't follow the guidance of grace. It bends others to its will completely, not through pacts or agreements, but through some form of corruption." Fear, the deathbed companion who had remained silent, finally spoke. "What would you have us do? We are each on our own journeys." "For now, gather information," Gideon replied. "Any Tarnished who ventures near Stormvale, observe but do not engage. We must understand this threat before we confront it." None present realized that within the shadows of the hold, an unseen observer listened. One of Sauron's servants had already infiltrated their sanctuary, bearing a fragment of his master's consciousness within its mind. The first great rune to fall into Sauron's grasp was, naturally, that of Godric the Grafted. Though the demigod had been defeated before Sauron's arrival, his rune remained within the castle, guarded by what remained of his servants. These guardians proved no match for Sauron's power. As he held the rune, Sauron perceived its nature, a fragment of fundamental law, a piece of the cosmic order that governed this reality. Unlike the rings of power from his world, which channeled and amplified existing forces, these runes were the forces themselves made manifest. "Fascinating," he murmured. "In this world, the very laws of nature can be held in one's hand." But a single rune was insufficient for his purposes. He needed more, ideally all of them, to enact his grand design. and so he turned his attention to the demigods who still held their portions of the Elden Ring. Scouts were dispatched in all directions. To Liurnia, where Renala, Queen of the Full Moon, presided over her academy with a great rune in her possession. To Caelid, where General Radahn, though maddened by scarlet rot, still guarded his piece of the ring. To Leyndell, where Morgoth the Omen King ruled from the throne of the Erdtree, and to places less known, where other fragments might be hidden. The Tarnished's journey continued, now shadowed by the knowledge of this new threat. In Liurnia, as they approached the Academy of Raya Lucaria, they found evidence of Sauron's reach, scholars bearing the mark of the Burning Eye, their research now directed toward a single purpose: understanding the metaphysical structure of the Elden Ring. After defeating the Red Wolf Guardian and making their way through the Academy's defenses, the Tarnished finally confronted Renala. But the encounter did not unfold as expected. The Queen of the Full Moon, cradling her amber egg, looked up with sorrowful eyes. "Another comes seeking my rune. You are too late, Tarnished One. A shadow has already passed through here, a presence of such terrible will that even my children could not stand against it." The Tarnished approached cautiously as Melina materialized nearby. "He did not take my rune by force," Renala continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "He offered knowledge, secrets of the stars and moon that even I, with all my celestial wisdom, had never glimpsed, knowledge from beyond this realm." A single tear traced down her cheek. "In my curiosity, I was deceived. I surrendered what was mine to protect, and only too late did I recognize the darkness behind the wisdom." "Where did he go?" Melina asked. "To Caelid," Renala replied. "He seeks the rune of Radahn next, but he left, emissaries behind. They watch, they listen." Her eyes darted to the shadows. "Even now they observe us." As if summoned by her words, figures emerged from the darkened corners of the chamber, Academy scholars with vacant eyes, moving with unnatural coordination. Upon their foreheads, burned into flesh, was the mark of the Burning Eye. "Run," Renala urged. "I will hold them here. Make for Caelid. Warn Radahn's warriors if you can, though I fear it may already be too late." In the heart of Caelid, amidst the scarlet bloom of rot that had consumed the region, Radahn's festival was underway. Warriors from across the lands between had gathered to grant the fallen general an honorable death, to free him from the madness that had consumed him. But as the Tarnished arrived at the shores of the poison lakes that surrounded the battlefield, they found chaos of a different kind. The warriors of the festival lay scattered, not felled by Radahn's mighty blades, but bent to a new will. Upon the battlefield stood Sauron, facing the massive form of General Radahn. The once proud warrior, devourer of stars, now a shambling giant consumed by rot, charged at this new challenger with bestial fury. Sauron raised a hand, and darkness erupted from his palm, not the familiar darkness of night, but a primordial void that seemed to devour light itself. It enveloped Radahn, who howled in confusion and rage. When the darkness receded, Radahn stood motionless, his one good eye now blazing with an internal fire that matched the mark upon Sauron's servants. "Kneel," Sauron commanded. The massive general who had resisted the full might of the scarlet rot, who had held back the very stars in their courses, slowly bent his enormous frame in obeisance. From his possession, Sauron extracted the great rune, adding it to his growing collection. The Tarnished watched this display from afar, hidden among the bones that littered the battlefield. There would be no confrontation today. They were not yet ready to face such power. Instead, they retreated, bearing witness to a transformation in the order of the lands between that few could have foreseen. News traveled quickly through the underground networks of information. Patches, the eternal survivor, brought word to the Round Table hold of what had transpired in Caelid. "It was unlike anything I've seen," the squatting merchant reported to Gideon. "This armored figure spoke words in a language I've never heard, yet somehow everyone understood. Radan's mind was broken by the rot, but this being, it didn't just control him, it restored him in some twisted way. The general retains his strength, but has lost whatever remained of his self." Gideon absorbed this information with growing concern. "And you say this being now commands Radan's soldiers as well?" "All of them," Patches confirmed with an uncomfortable laugh. "Every last one bearing that burning eye mark. They're mobilizing too, not just holding territory. They're moving in formation, with purpose." "Toward where?" "Some toward Altus Plateau, others south to Sofria River, but the main force." Patches hesitated. "They march on Lendel." The implications were clear. With two great runes in his possession, Sauron now set his sights on the capital and the rune held by Morgoth, the Omen King. "We must warn the capital," Dee insisted. "To what end?" Gideon countered. "Lendel has stood against countless threats. Its walls have never fallen. Perhaps this interloper will break himself against them as so many others have." But his words carried little conviction. All present sensed that the old order was crumbling, that the rules that had governed the lands between since the shattering were being rewritten by an outside force. The Tarnished, guided by Melina, changed course. If Sauron sought the great runes to accomplish some grand design involving the Erdtree, then their path was clear. They needed to reach the base of the tree before he could enact his plan. But the journey to Lendel was fraught with new dangers. The once predictable patterns of enemies had changed. Whole regions now operated under a single controlling intelligence. Camps that had been filled with squabbling independent soldiers now functioned with frightening efficiency. As they climbed the winding path toward the Altus Plateau, they encountered a small outpost that had thus far escaped Sauron's influence. There, a knight of Lendel offered grim news. "The capital is under siege," he reported, his armor dented and stained with blood. "An army unlike any we've faced. Soldiers from every corner of the lands between, moving as one. They don't fear death, they don't break formation, and they're led by something beyond our understanding." "Has the city fallen?" Melina asked. "Not when I left," the knight replied. "Morgoth still holds the throne, and the Erdtree's blessing still protects the outer walls. But this enemy, it doesn't assault in the conventional way. It's as if it's calling to something inside the city. Every day, more of our own turn, bearing that cursed eye symbol." The knight looked at the Tarnished with desperate hope. "If you truly follow the guidance of grace, then perhaps you are the answer to this threat. The two fingers speak of a Tarnished who would become Elden Lord. Perhaps that was always meant to be not just a restoration, but a salvation." Within his newly established tower in Liurnia, constructed from the repurposed structures of Raya Lucaria, Sauron continued his great work. Hugh labored at the forge day and night, combining smithing techniques from two worlds to create a vessel worthy of the power Sauron intended to wield. The two great runes hovered before him, suspended in a field of arcane energy. Sauron studied their structure, the way they connected to the greater cosmic order of this reality. They were keys, he had determined, but also building blocks, components of a system that could be reassembled in different configurations to produce different outcomes. The one who shattered the Elden Ring did not understand its true potential, Sauron mused to himself. They saw it only as a tool of governance, a means of maintaining order. But it is so much more. It is a framework upon which reality itself is written. From another chamber came the rhythmic sound of hammering as Hugh shaped a band of metal unlike any that had been forged in the lands between before. It contained elements from Sauron's original One Ring, salvaged from what he had brought with him through the void, combined with the unique properties of this world's materials. A servant entered, kneeling before its master. "The siege of Leyndell continues as you commanded, my lord. Our forces grow daily as more minds join with yours." "And what of the Tarnished that the prophecies speak of?" Sauron inquired. "Moving toward the capital, as expected, the one guided by the maiden with the burned hand." Sauron nodded. "Good. Let them come. They follow a path laid out by powers they barely comprehend. In seeking to restore the Elden Ring to its original state, they may well help me achieve my design." He turned back to the floating runes, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. 2 runes gathered, more soon to follow, and when I have enough, I shall forge not merely a new Elden Ring, but a One Ring to rule them all, a synthesis of powers from 2 worlds that shall make me master of both. The walls of Leyndell, capital of the Erdtree, glowed golden in the distance, their light defiant against the growing shadow. But even the strongest walls can be breached, not always by force, but sometimes by subtler means, by fear, by doubt, or by the slow corruption of truth into lies. And Sauron, lord of deceit, master of shadows, was patient. The lands between would be his, not through conquest alone, but through a gradual, inexorable transformation, one mind at a time, one rune at a time, until all that was became what he willed it to be. What if Sauron rose in the lands between? Part 3, Final. The Erdtree's light had begun to dim. Across the lands between, a palpable dread crept through villages and strongholds alike. Creatures of nightmare, neither of this world nor of Sauron's, emerged from the shadows, chimeric beings born of 2 realities colliding. In the chambers beneath the Round Table hold, Melina stood before the assembled Tarnished and their newfound allies. Her single eye blazed with determination as she unfurled ancient maps across the weathered table. "The corruption spreads faster than we anticipated," she said, tracing lines of shadow that had begun to cover the eastern realms. "The Dark Lord has established his fortress at the peak of Mount Gelmir, perverting the volcanic energies to forge his instruments of war." Rani the Witch, her porcelain features betraying rare concern, gestured toward the map with a delicate 4-armed motion. The stars themselves recoil from his presence. "This being wields magics unknown to even the oldest among us." The room fell silent as a figure stepped forward. The Witch King, once Sauron's most terrible servant, now freed from his master's dominion by the peculiar magics of death in the lands between. You cannot defeat him through conventional warfare, the wraith warned, his hollow voice chilling the air. Sauron has faced the greatest armies of 3 ages and emerged victorious. He will adapt to your tarnished champions as he adapted to the heroes of my world. Malekith, the Black Blade, growled from the shadows. Then we shall unleash unconventional warfare. His massive sword hungered for the taste of immortal flesh. Your Dark Lord has never faced death as it exists here. The Witch King's empty gaze turned toward the beast. You misunderstand. It is precisely your concept of death that empowers him. In my world, death was final, the gift of men. Here, death is merely transformation, and Sauron is the master of transformation. From the corner, a mirthless laugh echoed. Sir Gideon Ofnir adjusted his gleaming helmet. Knowledge is power, and we possess knowledge Sauron does not. The fingers, the greater will, the frenzied flame, our world has powers beyond his comprehension. Yet he learns quickly, Melina countered. Already he has bent the fire giants to his will, mastered incantations that took our scholars centuries to perfect. And now his eye turns toward the divine. Beyond the walls of their sanctuary, the land itself seemed to wither. The eternal conflict between the outer gods had momentarily paused, all cosmic attention now fixed upon the interloper who threatened to upset the delicate balance of power. In the ruins of Lindel, royal capital, Sauron stood before the remnants of the Elden throne. His form had evolved further, absorbing aspects of this world into his being. His armor now incorporated shards of golden runes, and upon his gauntleted hand, spectral rings glimmered, each one representing a fragment of the Elden Ring he had managed to claim. Behind him knelt his growing army, corrupted Tarnished, giants bound by rings of domination, and dragons whose minds had been twisted by his will. Most terrifying were his 9, no longer Nazgul, but reborn as lords of death, each one invested with the power of a great rune. The fractured order of this realm presents opportunity. Sauron's voice resonated through the broken halls. A shattered god, competing wills, immortality without purpose. His gaze lifted toward the dimming Erdtree. I shall forge a new ring, one to command not merely the mortal kingdoms, but the very gods themselves. The fingers trembled in his presence, their ancient communication with the greater will disrupted by powers they could not comprehend. Sauron had learned to intercept their messages, to distort the very cosmic frequencies through which the outer gods exerted their influence. His lieutenant, once known as Morgoth the Omen King, now transformed into something far more terrible, approached with reverence. The preparations are complete, Lord. The forge beneath Mount Gelmir burns with the fire of the One Eye. Sauron nodded. Begin the ritual. When the moon rises blood red, we shall commence the binding. Across the scarlet wastes of Caelid, a lone figure rode against the crimson winds. Malenia, blade of Miquella, had abandoned her vigil at the Haligtree upon sensing the new threat. Her prosthetic limbs gleamed in the sickly light as she urged her steed forward, golden hair streaming behind her. Though the scarlet rot had consumed much of her being, she remained one of the most formidable demigods, perhaps the only one who could match Sauron in direct combat. She was not alone. Beside her rode a figure few had seen in an age, her twin brother Miquella, freed from his cocoon by the chaos spreading across the realm. Though still childlike in appearance, ancient wisdom burned in his eyes, and the power of his unalloyed gold, the only substance truly resistant to outside influence, radiated from his slender form. The alignment approaches. Miquella's voice carried the weight of prophecy. When the stars shift and the moon bleeds, he will attempt to bind the outer gods themselves to his will. Then we shall sever his hands before he can complete his work, Malenia replied, her voice hard as the edge of her legendary blade. It will not be so simple, sister, Miquella cautioned. This being existed before time as we know it. He has witnessed the birth and death of worlds. Our strength alone will not prevail. Then what hope remains? Miquella's expression softened. Hope lies in that which he cannot comprehend, that which exists beyond power, beyond domination. As they crested the hill, they beheld the gathering forces of the Tarnished coalition, a desperate alliance of former enemies now united against a threat greater than their ancient grudges. In the shadows of the Erdtree's roots, Rani worked ancient magic. Her doll form hovered above a ritual circle as her spectral hands wove patterns of starlight. Before her stood a being, not of the lands between, Gandalf the White, pulled through the thinning veil between worlds by her cosmic sorcery. The wizard's eyes widened as he took in his surroundings, his gnarled hand tightening around his staff. Where am I? What manner of enchantment has brought me to this strange realm? One of necessity, Rani replied. Your ancient foe has come to our world and threatens to enslave it as he once attempted with yours. Understanding dawned in Gandalf's weathered face. Sauron, but how? He was undone when the One Ring perished. Death works differently here, came a voice from the darkness. The Witch King stepped forward, causing Gandalf to raise his staff defensively. Peace, Mithrandir, the Wraith said. I am no longer bound to the Dark Lord's will. In this realm, death brought unexpected liberation. Gandalf lowered his staff, but remained wary. Explain. Rani gestured to the cosmos above them, visible through the great roots. Your world and ours exist as adjacent realities, wizard. When your Dark Lord was defeated, his spirit did not dissipate as you believed. Instead, it drifted through the void until finding our realm, a place where death is not an ending but a transformation. And now he grows stronger, the Witch King added, drawing power from the outer gods, bending the very rules of existence to his purpose. Gandalf's expression darkened. Then the threat is graver than before. In Middle-earth, Sauron sought dominion over free peoples. Here it seems he aspires to enslave the divine itself. We need your wisdom, Rani said, your knowledge of his methods, his weaknesses. The wizard stroked his beard thoughtfully. Sauron's greatest weakness was always his pride. His inability to comprehend that power could be willingly surrendered, that strength could exist in restraint rather than dominance. His eyes met Rani's. Tell me of your world's magic, its fundamental nature. Perhaps therein lies our answer. The blood moon rose over Mount Gelmir as Sauron began his grand working. The volcano's crater had been transformed into a massive forge, its magma channeled into patterns reminiscent of the black speech of Mordor, but infused with the runic language of the Erdtree. At 9 points surrounding the forge stood his new ring-wraiths, each one a conquered demigod or legend of the lands between, bound to his will through corrupted great runes. The power they channeled caused the very air to warp and distort. At the center of the forge floated a ring unlike any other, neither gold like the One Ring nor glowing like the fragments of the Elden Ring. This new creation seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously, sometimes appearing solid, other times as pure energy or conceptual mathematics made manifest. From the dust of a broken god and the remnants of my former glory, Sauron intoned, his voice echoing across dimensions, I forge the ring of convergence. Through it all wills shall be bound, mortal, divine, and cosmic. As he spoke, spectral representatives of the outer gods themselves began to materialize, drawn unwillingly to the ritual by the tremendous gravitational pull of Sauron's magic. The greater will, the frenzied flame, the formless mother, entities beyond mortal comprehension, all being slowly dragged into the binding. The sky fractured with eldritch light as reality itself protested the violation. Sauron raised his hands, now burning with the combined power of the Erdtree's grace and his own primordial darkness. I name myself Lord of all rings, Master of gods and men, the final shape of— His pronouncement was interrupted by a blinding flash as the perimeter of his fortress exploded inward. Through the breach poured the united forces of the lands between, tarnished champions, loyal beasts, and the few remaining uncorrupted demigods. Leading the charge was Millennia, her prosthetic arm trailing scarlet rot as she cleaved through corrupted soldiers with mechanical precision. Beside her rode her brother Miquella, whose mere presence seemed to disrupt the binding spells Sauron had placed upon his thralls. The battle erupted across the volcanic crater. Sauron's forces fought with terrible coordination, while the coalition attacked with desperate fury. Dragons clashed in the skies above, their elemental breath weapons creating apocalyptic storms. Giants hurled boulders that shattered against barriers of sorcery. Amidst the chaos, Sauron remained focused on his ritual, the ring of convergence now pulsing with increasing power. Each surge pulled the outer gods closer to his binding. Your resistance is futile, he called out, his voice booming across the battlefield. I have surpassed the limitations of my former self. In this realm I have become more than a Dark Lord. I am becoming the very fabric of order itself. From the smoke of battle emerged a familiar figure. Gandalf, his white robes billowing, staff raised high. You have learned nothing from your defeat, Sauron. Still you seek to dominate what you cannot understand. Sauron's burning gaze fixed upon his ancient enemy, the White Wizard. How fitting that you should witness my ascension. In your world, I was constrained by its rules, its pitiful conceptualization of power. Here, I have found truth, that divinity itself is malleable. And therein lies your error, Gandalf replied, advancing steadily despite the waves of dark energy emanating from the Dark Lord. You mistake malleability for weakness, when it is precisely this quality that gives this world its strength. With a gesture of contempt, Sauron unleashed a torrent of corrupted elden magic toward Gandalf. The wizard raised his staff, meeting the assault with light that seemed drawn from another world entirely. As the two powers clashed, Melina and Rani enacted their own counter-ritual at the edge of the battlefield. Using knowledge gleaned from both worlds, they began to unravel the cosmic knots Sauron had tied, slowly releasing the outer gods from his grasp. The battle raged for what seemed like days, though time itself had become distorted around Mount Gelmir. Warriors fell and rose again, death proving impermanent in the chaotic convergence of cosmic forces. Sauron, sensing the unraveling of his grand design, abandoned the ritual and joined the combat directly. His form grew massive, reminiscent of his appearance during the War of the Last Alliance, yet infused with the golden radiance of stolen grace. Each step shattered the earth. Each swing of his mace sent champions flying. Malenia engaged him directly, her waterfowl dance cutting through his defenses with supernatural speed. Yet for each wound she inflicted, Sauron's form simply reformed, the rules of materiality becoming increasingly irrelevant to his existence. "You cannot defeat me through martial prowess," he taunted as he caught her blade with his gauntleted hand. "I have transcended such limitations." "Perhaps," came the voice of Miquella, who approached with an object glowing with unalloyed gold, a simple ring crafted of material resistant to all outside influence. "But you have not transcended your nature, Dark Lord." Sauron's attention fixed upon the golden ring, his entire being suddenly tense with desire. For all his evolution, the fundamental hunger at his core remained unchanged, the need to dominate, to possess, to control. As he reached for Miquella's creation, Gandalf called out, "Now!" From positions around the battlefield, the Tarnished champions activated ancient waypoints, sites of grace connected to create a perfect circle around Sauron. The Dark Lord found himself trapped within a prison of light, his connection to the Ring of Convergence suddenly severed. Rani and Melina completed their counter-ritual, causing the half-formed Ring of Convergence to destabilize. The outer gods, freed from Sauron's attempted binding, retreated to their respective realms, but not before exacting a price for his presumption. Cosmic forces beyond comprehension converged upon the trapped Dark Lord, the greater will, the frenzied flame, and entities with no name in human tongue each extracted a portion of the power he had accumulated. "What is happening?" Sauron raged as his form began to fracture, golden light spilling from the cracks in his armor. "This cannot be. I am eternal." "No being is truly eternal," Gandalf replied solemnly. "Not even the gods of this realm. All things must change or perish. This is the true law that governs all worlds." The Witch King approached the collapsing circle, his empty hood revealing nothing of his thoughts. "You offered us dominion, but gave only servitude. In both worlds, your promise was false." With a gesture from Rani, the waypoints flared with increased intensity, and the prison of light began to contract. Sauron's form compressed, his magnificent armor crumpling inward, the stolen grace and corrupted runes tearing away from his essence. In a final act of defiance, he reached out toward his unfinished Ring of Convergence, but Melina was faster. She grasped the unstable creation and, channeling the flame of the Forge of Giants, cast herself and the ring into the heart of the volcano. The explosion that followed seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. For those present, it appeared as both a blinding flash and a moment of absolute stillness, a paradox of perception as reality reasserted its proper order. When vision returned to the survivors, Sauron was gone, not destroyed, for beings of his nature could never truly be unmade, but diminished and cast adrift between worlds, reduced to less than a whisper, less than a memory. In the crater where he had stood remained only a single, mundane ring of blackened metal, a token of his failure and a warning for ages to come. In the months that followed, the lands between slowly healed. The corruption Sauron had spread receded, though it left its mark upon the realm. New forms of life emerged from the convergence, creatures bearing aspects of both worlds, neither entirely of Middle-earth nor fully of the Erdtree's design. Gandalf, with the help of Rani's magic, returned to his own reality, carrying with him knowledge to ensure the barriers between worlds would be strengthened. The Witch King and those few of Sauron's servants who had found liberation chose to remain, finding in the cycles of rebirth a chance for redemption denied them in their original existence. Melina had survived her sacrifice, though changed in ways even she did not fully understand. The encounter with forces from beyond had awakened new purpose in her, and she departed on a journey to the lands beyond the fog, seeking knowledge to prevent such convergences in the future. Upon the highest peak of Mount Gelmir, a monument was raised, not to commemorate victory, but to serve as a reminder of the eternal vigilance required to maintain the balance between order and chaos, between stagnation and change. And deep within the roots of the Erdtree, in a chamber known to few, the plain black ring was sealed away, unremarkable to look upon, yet carrying within it the potential for both creation and destruction. For even diminished and defeated, Sauron's essence remained a testament to an inescapable truth, that the desire for dominion never truly vanishes from any world. It merely changes form, awaiting those who would seek its terrible promise. The Tarnished returned to their endless quest, the demigods to their ageless conflicts, and the outer gods to their cosmic machinations. The lands between continued its cycles of death and rebirth, its fundamental nature unchanged yet enriched by the encounter with a power from beyond. For in the convergence of worlds, both had been transformed, neither remaining entirely as they were, yet each continuing in their own way, guided by their own laws, their own grace, their own destiny.